A different perspective, a new insight into life, a nugget of positivity and a hidden truth, and maybe an amusement for you. Welcome to From My Standpoint, a twice-a-month podcast with your host, Josh C. Jones.
I appreciate you tuning in again to From My Standpoint. I'm your host, Josh C. Jones. If this is your first time listening, then I thank you for tuning in. And if it's not, well, thank you for coming back. And don't forget that if you prefer to read, I suggest you check out the blog at FromTheirStandpoint.com. That's from THEIR standpoint.com, where I will sometimes add links and some extra information that may not be in the podcast. All right, now that that's done, hello there. In I Did Not See That Coming, Part 1, I talked with you about a story that happened to me involving two people arguing, and one who truly seemed, to me at least, truly seemed to believe that feelings are the most championed asset, rather than the truth, facts, context, and technicalities. But we should not completely fault that person, for we all fall into this trap from time to time. Now, if you remember, they were extremely intent to quickly label me and anyone who did not kneel before their perception and feelings as stupid, racist, and Nazi. So let us continue this discussion and look into some of those statements, the definitions of their labeling, and look at some history behind their accusations. Like I said before, the history part is to give a clear context to the story that I told in Part 1. And just because I like this saying, as I said in Part 1, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So let's learn some history. And for those who wish to see more of the history, I will post a bullet type point list of an important aspect of history on the show notes, which is also the blog, at FromTheirStandpoint.com, and click on the blogs tab and find my show, From My Standpoint. Because it is a little too long to just speak in the podcast here, but you can view it at the blog.
Is this where the history part comes in?
Wow. Already with the questions? But yes, it is Random Voice of Questions. So, since they liked to throw the term Nazi around and label anyone who does not completely agree or participate with their thinking as Nazi or Nazis, stupid, and racist, something that I'm sure we've all ran into many times before in the current culture we live. And, on a side note, let me get sidetracked here a little bit. In today's times, and especially with this going on and what we see in the media and on social media and in our culture today, this really makes me think of 2 Timothy 3. And I'm going to shorten it here just a little bit, but it says, quote, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. They are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over gullible women, who are loaded down with sins and are swayed by all kinds of evil desires, always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. So also these teachers oppose the truth. They are of depraved minds, but they will not get very far because their folly will be clear to everyone." End quote. But I digress. Let me get back to the topic at hand here. First, to check these points, we must ask, what is a Nazi? Well, in layman's terms, a Nazi is a person holding similar views of a bad political party that rose to power in the 1930s in Germany.
Doesn't everyone know that already?
Yeah, Random Voice of Questions. I would bet that most people do. So, what is Nazism? Well, it is a socialistic ideal based on racism and government expansion. What did they stand for? Well, in most people's minds, very, very bad things.
An astute observation, indeed.
Thank you, Random Voice of Reason, I think.
What is the purpose and intended effect of throwing the word Nazi around in an argument or debate?
Well, random voice of questions, on rare occasions, and these are very, 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 very rare occasions, it can be used to show a good example or comparison for better clarity of a point. But in most cases, well, the supermajority of cases, I would say, and especially as in this case I just described, I think it is to rouse an emotion, to dehumanize the other person, and to force the end of a discussion or debate.
But why would someone want to just force the end of a discussion or a debate? Do they not want to learn?
That is a very good question, random voice of questions, but it's one I'm not going to answer in this episode. Maybe another episode.
Well, okay then. Who most closely resembles what the Nazi Party stood for, if anyone?
That is another good question, random voice of questions. And interestingly enough, one could find some similarities in both parties based on the Nazis' 25 points. These will be listed in the blog, but not read in the podcast.
Did you say both parties?
Yes, I did, random voice of questions. Now, on a side note here, another interesting observation is the slight changes made to the definitions of words. Now, history is weird, and as we all should know, events and historical figures change. Words and their definitions change, and good portions of history and these changes are actually forgotten.
Why are they forgotten?
So many questions, random voice of questions, and so little time. Oh, that's just for another time. Back to the point here. In the 1940s, Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and all the way through the early 2000s, it stated the definitions as Nazi, relating to or consistent with or typical of the ideology and practice of Nazism, and Nazism as a form of socialism featuring racism and expansionism. And like I said, these definitions changed. They slightly changed in the mid to late 2000s. And you will get a slightly different definition if you read the first definition that pops up in Google and the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. And there's a few others. I kept getting slightly variations of the definition. But it now reads Nazi, a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party of or concerning the Nazis or Nazism, fascist, intolerant, and Nazism as the political principles of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, extreme racist or authoritarian views or behavior. Fascist is a person who subscribes to a political philosophy, that is fascism, which calls for a strong central government that is, a dictatorial or dictatorship type government that controls all industry and commerce, who have no tolerance or desire for the discussion or freedom to express opposing views, who emphasize the group, that is, the nation or a specific race of people, over the individual and individual rights, and who use force to suppress all opposition and criticism. Now, on an interesting side note here, I just Googled the word fascism, and I noticed there's something in there that wasn't there just, a few years ago, 3 years ago, when I wrote this episode as a blog, and now I'm rewriting it as a podcast here, but I've noticed that they've added something to it, because now it says fascism is a form of far right. So they're saying it's a form of the far right political spectrum. Yeah, it's interesting that that's been added in the last few years. But like I said, definitions change all the time. So, back on track. Authoritarian is the favoring or enforcing strict obedience to authority, especially to the government or one's political party, at the expense of personal freedom. So, it is submission of freedom and rights granted to the individual for the collective whole by the governing body in power. Prejudice is a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. In other words, prejudice is a subjective, not an objective assessment. It is based on feelings and personal opinions, perceptions, or view. Intolerant, well, you're just going to have to read my book, Volume 2, Your Foundation in Action, for more on this one when it is published. Racist is a person who shows or feels discrimination or prejudice against people of other races, or who believes that a particular race is superior to another. And race is a grouping of humans based on shared physical, and this is not just color, or social qualities. This can include political viewpoints for societal progress, and character is actually a form of social qualities, into categories generally viewed as distinct by society. So essentially, Nazis were a particular group who, following Hitler's path, wanted government intervention. Well, really, it was government control of all aspects of life, social spending, and a superior German utopian race, but did so through many racist and prejudice and just evil means of atrocity.
So, what was Nazism?
Thank you for breaking up the monotony, random voice of questions. I appreciate it, and I'm pretty sure the listening audience does too. So, Nazism consisted of multiple aspects, each used to expand governmental power and control, to oppress and silence opposition, to eliminate those deemed undesirable, to create a superior utopia, and to create complete societal control over the individual. And it was all done through racist and prejudice and evil means of atrocity.
What did they do?
Oh, random voice of questions. Are you sure you want a supposedly stupid racist Nazi to explain this?
That was funny.
Yeah, I thought it was funny too to make fun of that. But okay, back to the topic. The big atrocity that everyone knows was the Holocaust. But Nazis also practiced eugenics, which is the study of methods of improving genetic qualities by selective breeding. Interestingly enough, though, they also used eugenics for the killing of the unwanted, the burdensome, the weak, the mentally challenged, the lame, the old, and the not yet born. Anyone they deemed as a burden on a person or a society. They were attempting to eliminate all those that they deemed undesirable. Nazis used propaganda in movies, video, print, news, and education to dehumanize the Jews and all of their political opponents. I mean, just look at the source. As Adolf Hitler said in his book Mein Kampf, quote, "The very first condition which has to be fulfilled in every kind of propaganda is a systematically subjective and one-sided attitude towards every problem that has to be dealt with." End quote. They censored any and all material and views, in public, in private, in schools, in libraries, everywhere. They censored all material and views that were in opposition to their political party, to their utopian view, and to their way of life. They often took to violent protests and riots to disrupt events, meetings, rallies, movies, gatherings, and yes, even private and non-political meets, in the attempt to eliminate what they believed was oppressive and offensive and what they deemed as hate speech. As they observed and understood, facts and technicalities mean nothing if feelings are involved, and especially if feelings are perceived as the most championed asset. As they also said in Mein Kampf, quote, "The receptive powers of the masses are very restricted and their understanding feeble. Propaganda must appeal to the feelings of the public rather than to their reasoning powers." End quote. Wow. I'm going to read that again. "The receptive powers of the masses are very restricted and their understanding feeble. Propaganda must appeal to the feelings of the public rather than to their reasoning powers. Propaganda must appeal to people's feelings, not the facts, not the evidence, not the truth." That is just, wow. But back to the topic. They did and supported numerous other atrocities and prejudice and racist and fascist things, all in an attempt to gain power, to silence any opposing views or opinions or perceptions or ideologies, and started a movement to defund, well, this is where your independent research must come in if you wish to learn more about them. and that is if you choose to. Oh, don't get me wrong, I think we can all agree that in our own personal and subjective opinion, belief, experience, perception, or view, we could easily be influenced to label a person or group of persons as stupid, racist, and Nazi. However, I believe this would be a great disservice to not only them and us, but to the learning, understanding, growth, freedom, happiness, and success that each of us wish and strive for in our lives, for our families, for our communities, and, yes, for our nation. Emotions are important. Feelings are valuable and a vital part of us being human. But let's not get so caught up in our feelings that we allow our emotions to cause us to ignore facts, to push the truth aside, to dismiss evidence that goes against what we want to believe, to lose sight of the opportunities to be honest, to be truthful, to learn, to grow, to experience, to listen, and most importantly, let's not get so caught up in our feelings and emotions that we forsake our humanity with each other. Remember, we are in this journey of life together, so let us act like it. If you have not yet subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe to From My Standpoint to ensure you receive a reminder when new episodes are released. You can follow me on Facebook at FM Standpoint, on Instagram at From My Standpoint, or visit the website www.fromtheirstandpoint.com. That's from THEIR standpoint.com, and click on my show, From My Standpoint. And now, what you've all been waiting for. It's the wisdom of Dad Joke. If we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat history. And if we keep repeating history, then we will never learn. And if we keep choosing to erase history and stop learning from it, then we become what Einstein is credited with stating, quote, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results," end quote. And if we keep living in insanity, then we can become insane and easily lose control of our emotions. And this makes us shout the exact same as the Roman numerals for 999, 51, 6, and 500.
This has been From My Standpoint, a podcast to find a nugget of positivity and a hidden truth, encouraging and enlightening insight, entertaining a new perspective, and providing an amusement for you. We hope you were entertained, encouraged, enlightened, and enjoyed the show.